Welcome, everybody, to the Fullcast Fireside Chat. I'm your host, Tyler Simons. I'm the head of customer success at Fullcast, and we are a go-to-market planning and execution platform. Today, we've got a special guest, Colten Hoth, over at Lucid. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're up to?
Yeah. So over at Lucid, I am the director of territory and capacity planning on the go-to-market ops team. Lucid, for those who don't know, is a online collaborative software to let you diagram and whiteboard together from wherever you're at. So you can do that live. It's a great product. Check it out.
I feel like everyone knows it as like Lucid Chart because
Yeah.
I think that's where they started, and then they've got a couple of other things out there, and
Yeah.
they rebranded to Lucid recently.
Yeah. Very true. A couple other products out there we're excited about. Check them out.
Yeah. What are we talking about today? I think we're going to talk a little bit about balancing territories, right? And to me, it's not just like go in and do the number of accounts thing. There's added complexity that we can build into these things as we go. And so really that's where you're been brought in you've got some cool ideas with machine learning, maybe like neural network stuff that we'll talk about at the end here. But we wanted to really start at these stages of maturities to give people a scope of kind of where they're at in the grand scheme of things. Because I think there'll be some people at the very beginning of their phases, and then there'll be some people that are truly advanced. As you think about the stages of maturity when it comes to a balance or like to balancing territories, let's see if we can put some stages to this.
Yeah.
What are some stages of this for us?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll be speaking from kind of like a product-led growth and an account-based territory model perspective, right? Because you have sales-led growth where you've got a physical geo territory that sales reps are prospecting in. From that product-led growth, we assign out the accounts, and that's the territory they work on. So I'll speak from that standpoint. So yeah, from there, some of the stages that I think about are like a small size company, then to a medium sized company and a large size company, right? And there's lots of little things in between, but if you think about a small company starting out with a handful of reps, very small, your TAM and your number of accounts is really large. So the pretty much just go grab and sell to anything. And so I've seen some smaller companies where before RevOps was really established, reps would just go in and grab accounts and just sell to anybody, right? And the Wild West, and and there's enough for everybody, right? As you start to move into like that mid-size company or you're getting a little bigger, you start to look at some of the productivity. How do we make this more efficient to help us grow a little more focused and drive some of that? And we can talk mostly about that transition.
See, no, I think it's interesting because I would say a lot of people are beyond just reps going, grabbing whatever they want because there's problems with that, right? Me, I think the biggest thing that calls out to that of just reps doing whatever they want is the we had an SDR that did this. It was like the poachers of the world where you would work an account and then dump it, and then somebody else would swoop in and grab whatever activity was there and then eventually create an opportunity within 30 days of that. And so you have these collision events that happen between reps, and that can cause a little strife in the organization. I don't know if there's anything else that you've seen with the problems of just having reps grab whatever they want.
Yeah, definitely a problem. It's just attribution and who gets paid and the commissions come into play. When you get to like that size, we're like, we need to set some ROEs, some rules of engagement. That's really when you're like, okay, we need to get a territory strategy. That's first things that goes into the rules of engagement along with compensation plans. Once you're at that point and you're like, okay, we've got some rules set up. How do we do this? Do we just divide evenly all the accounts? Do we create some industries? Or too early for that, right? There's a lot of questions and factors that go into that.
So how do we where would I start? Let's say I'm at that stage, right? We'll get into some of the more complex stuff in a bit, but I want to start at this very beginning thing of how do I go from reps do whatever they want to building my first set of structure and thinking about what should a balanced territory look like?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the obvious one is number of accounts. Start there. You can do that fairly quickly. It makes it generally even across the board, right? Everyone gets equal number of accounts. Maybe you can add a little sophistication, the size of an account, right? You've got everyone has a little bit of high spenders, some middle spenders, and then some newer accounts. So that's pretty easy to do right from the get-go, right? Let's set a territory that way without a lot of modeling or algorithms. We're just filtering and grouping things together.
Isn't South Dakota comes to mind for me. Because there's going to be accounts in North and South Dakota, but obviously you maybe not be building like a geo specific territory around that, but are all accounts created equally, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that depending on how broad your ICP is or whatever it might be, the account located in North Dakota might not be as high quality
Yeah.
as maybe something in the Bay Area in a specific industry. So after we get through these like number of accounts, is there this next level that you typically see? You see where I'm going with this? We're just
Yeah.
going
Yep.
to
Yeah. I think when you're asking about like, okay, when do I move to that next level? Like we need to like, okay, let's dive in and get some sophistication. Some of the indicators or things that will trigger you thinking about this is if a sales rep comes to you and says, I got a great territory this year. This is awesome. Killed it. And then you have that same year, sales rep saying, this was a terrible territory. I did crappy. The
yeah,
territory screwed me over. Then you're like, okay, wow, there's people are performing differently. Or within a segment, right? Your mid cap, your enterprise team, within that segment, some people are killing it, some people aren't, right? So you start to bring in some of the not only qualitative from the sales reps, but you have some of the quantitative you start to feed in of just the performance of reps in those territories. And you're like, okay, maybe we need to do a little bit more balancing here or bring in some other like attributes to make this fair. So someone's not stuck with those Midwestern states and maybe aren't great for tech sales and balancing that way. So I think those are some of the questions or things that start to come up is when you see differences between reps within segment and some of that qualitative feedback that you hear.
it's not the rep.
That's always the tough one. Always tough one. Which you look at activity and different things like that. But your assumption is everyone can perform and do their job, and you have to live off of that, right? Otherwise, you won't be able to build a good territory.
Now, if I'm starting to think about that, like in terms of just what is there's questions to ask. But where am I going with this? I want to know from my perspective, if I'm looking at adding more than just number of accounts to this, I want to be able to figure out what that is that I need to look for. And I feel like each business is different. Like they're not always going to be like along employee lines or a specific like propensity to buy or like a signal. How do I go about figuring that out? What questions should I be asking to like big to figure out what metrics I need to be focused in?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. And I think back to those kind of the stages we were talking about of you go from like number of accounts, you move into maybe now we're starting to figure out like what are some of the factors that are leading to success, which starts to lead into some of the account scoring.
Yeah.
I think like that middle stage, you're not really focused on like verticals quite yet. Maybe as you get a little more advanced and you're further along in the journey of kind of a mid to large cap, you might look at specializing and doing verticals at that point. But if we're talking about that stage of moving from just pure number of accounts into what are the things that are leading to success in a territory, that's when you need to start bringing in like some statistical analysis and doing some simple correlation work is a great way to start. And for people who are like, geez, I don't even know how to do that. Excel, you could do it in Excel, right? You can do it in Tableau. There's some really simple things you can run just on your data. So how I normally do it is I just download all of your data and you've got the accounts that have won, accounts that have brought in IARR or ARR for that year, and accounts that haven't. And then you can run your different statistical models on those different factors or columns. So you can look at like your white space, you can look at like your allocation percentage. You can look at industry, but at this point, probably not. You're just trying to figure out like what are the fields that are like leading or generally have somewhat of a correlation to success. And that can be like the number of opportunities. You can throw in activities, number of calls or meetings. And then as you start to look at all these different metrics against that IARR, some of them will start to show some correlation. And that's when you start to think, okay, this one's a little more important. So for us, we're a product-led growth company. What stands out is previous spend, which is obvious, right? Like someone's come into the website, they purchased some of the product. Oh, now they've brought in some of their teammates. There's some momentum starting to build. And if that's happening in a short amount of time, then that tends to get a higher score or like a higher correlation, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Now, is there like other things you want me to dive in there?
How would I do this? If I'm just going to do this in Excel, I know that there's a correlation function. I don't know. I think like CORREL or whatever for
Yeah.
internet. So get into. If I've never done this, what would be a great first step in this? Okay, we download our data. We've got our customers with the ARR. Now, is it just like a matter of pulling that and some other data point and then seeing if they're correlated using the function? Like, how do I go about doing that? Figuring that.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're speaking from like an analyst perspective who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience in this, you're exactly right. Your whatever database you're in, your CRM, you can download the data. You may need to manipulate it a little bit if you need to create some field. Like give me their ARR growth the last 12 or 18 months. And that's gonna be like the field you're comparing against. This would be like who's bringing in revenue. And then you're comparing that and correlating it to all the other columns that you have. And you may need to do a little bit of work to join some data sets together and your analytics team can help with that. But once you have that brought in, you're not that far away from being able to figure out just some really simple, some correlation metrics there.
And you're just pulling things out, right? Oh, I think maybe this might be correlated. So you run it and see, okay, well, wait, maybe I'm actually wrong.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that's exactly what we've done in the past is, you can start with some of your sales reps or even if you don't have no idea, like hypothesis on your own. Hey, what are some of the things you look at? What's a good account or what's a good company to go after? And they'll tell you, right? Like what they're interested in. And then you can go run the correlation against that and be like, oh, is that true or is it not true? And see if it's how it's coming out. So you can start there. And then as you're in the data, you'll figure out some of the things that are most likely leading to success, right?
Great. So we've identified these things. And then you probably are going to put, if we still are talking about account scoring, are we going to put like point values on things? How do we figure out, like each item we'd see like correlated to, let's say, account growth? One is probably stronger signal than another version, right? There's more high correlation between one data point versus another. So do you just like weight these things? How would you go about structuring that? Because this is ultimately going to go into maybe one score that, let's say it's 0 to 100 or whatever the scale is. And then from there, you're going to leverage that to balance the territories, right? So we are leaping into something, but we want to be able to get a score structured.
Yeah, definitely. And so we're definitely moving to account scoring. How do you do this? And you can do it internally, and I'll talk a little bit to that. Or there's companies out there that you can buy, right? So this is the build versus buy debate, right? Are we going to have our analytics team, our engineers help build this? And there's a couple different ways to do that. We've built internally and we've purchased. So we've tried both methods and talk a little bit about how internally we did it. And then obviously there's other companies you can buy from if you just want to like spend the money and not take the time.
I like the tactical stuff. Like we're here trying to figure this stuff out. And I think the benefit of like when you do build something, you do understand what you're trying to do it more deeply so that if you ended up going to buy something that you actually understand really the workings behind all of it. But anyway, talk a little bit about what you did.
Yeah. So the simple way, like I mentioned, we start off with some of those correlation metrics and figured out, okay, here's like 5 or 6 fields that are like really showing out. We're like, these are very interesting to us, right? That are correlated to torque growth. And then we started pulling those into a regression model. And so working with our analytics team, we were building our own internal score by feeding them lots of different data points from like our product usage to the account level metrics to then build a score and an output on predicting what each account will do based on their kind of their firmographic data and their activity within the product. And so using those two different data sets together, we were able to get a pretty decent score on the account level. It was working pretty well, but on the aggregate, like at a territory or even like a segment level, it was working really well. And we were really happy with that. Just working with that internal model. Obviously, there's a lot of maintenance and costs to go along with that, but it was actually really good to build. So we understood like what are actual fields they're important, and they're probably not going to change if we like bring in an external party who's going to do the scoring for us. Yeah, they're pretty much the same fields and the same information we're looking at, but they're just doing it at scale.
Okay. You talk about regression. We've talked about correlation, and then you just dropped another term on me for regression.
Yeah.
Now, what is like a regression? Obviously, is the next step beyond just figuring out that this field impacts this field, which is the correlation. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about what regression is and why we should do that?
Yeah. Regression is like a really great step once you're done with those correlations. You figure out what's important because you're starting to move into some of the predictive analytics. Not only have I done like the understanding to figure out like what's working in our data, but you're like, okay, let's start to predict a little bit and see what's most likely going to happen given certain data points, given activity on an account. Can we predict like their revenue that's coming in or their account score, right? In this case. So this really sets you up to plan for that next year and to build those balanced territories because you're forecasting kind of the growth on these accounts and you can group them together and build like equitable books up from that.
Yeah. Basically, the way I'm understanding this is not only are we doing the correlation and the regression, but the point of all of this, the reason we're going through all of this analysis is to identify key points within an account that help us tell us, is this actually a good account or is it not a good account?
Yes.
Because going back to the previous thing of just, we're going to balance our territories. Let's go build me 10 territories and balance them evenly by a number of accounts. It's possible that one of those territories is going to get a lot of crappy accounts. And so as we start to figure out what those key data points are, we can then also look at, sure, these 10 territories have 100 accounts each, but beyond that, when we look at the key data points that are highly correlated and have the biggest impact on when they change or positive, negative, whatever that might be, then that's what we can see as a secondary line and further kind of balance those territories out. So that's like this next level
Yep.
of maturity. And people usually build that stuff into a score, which makes balancing much easier.
Yep.
I would argue you kind of don't really need to do a score if you don't want to, and you can just look at those like source metrics too.
Yeah, that's a great point. So like when you're going to actually move into the territory building, so mostly been focusing on scoring the account, figuring out like what are the important fields or the attributes. That's the account scoring, you spend time there. Then the second part is like the actual building or the optimization, right? And so there's two different models you can start there. Let me do some machine learning or some statistical analysis and like score the accounts. And then let's move into the actual building and you're going to like optimize on this. And so obviously there's tools out there to do that. Fullcast is great. Like how do you maximize the output or the score of for a territory? Or if you have some analysts in your team that are decent in R or Python, some great algorithm models out there that you can build an optimizer that's just going to take like, how do we maximize the ARR or whatever your score is in each of the books or your territory. Sorry, I use books and territories interchangeably, but how do you maximize that territory score or value based on those attributes you found out are important?
We got some questions because I do want to make sure that we get into this machine learning and neural network thing that you and I talked about before
Yeah.
the Fireside Chat, but I do want to ask these questions real quick so we can just do that and then we'll talk a little bit. But so the first one is, what if you find an attribute of a good account that isn't captured in data? What do you do?
What would be an example of that? I don't know, Tyler, if you know.
So to me, something that your data provider isn't providing. Maybe that's, you know what, maybe you just have Zoom info. You're not getting technographic information. You decide that the account, if an account has, I don't know, gain site and it's like intensity, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think you can relate to that. For instance, we're a software company. We work great with companies that are on the cloud or using AWS. What if your data vendor isn't giving you like that information? You can't figure it out. There's some other ways you can try and figure that stuff out. We can figure out like, are they on like a Google server? They're most likely not like a Microsoft shop, right? So they're probably doing a lot of cloud work. And so you can explore different ways you can bring in those variables. If it's purely something you're missing, you may have to rely on sales reps, which is unfortunate, right? To, hey, everyone fill out this scorecard or fill out this form and help gather information. But that's like the worst case scenario that you want to get to. You can derive it or use other methods to pull in that information that are like adjacent to it. That's the best case scenario.
Or you can try and find another data provider.
You can buy some more data. Yes.
Always buy more data. So what about, do you ever consider like buyer or contact attributes in territory balancing?
Yes, a little bit. The way we do that is by doing like a lead score and then aggregating lead scores to like an account score. So it is in there, but I'm not using persona attributes really in like the territory building, but it is derived in like a good account score generally has like leads coming in. They've got good allocation or like admin activity on an account.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay. Let's talk about, you were talking to me about some machine learning techniques that you're exploring. You've got some like ideas around that, or you were like, oh, I just want to build like this neural network and just let it go to town. So talk about where these ideas are. And like, I feel like this is potentially the future of territory
Yeah.
bound
Yeah.
planning.
Well, so, but obviously the goal is like, can we get the most fair territories, but, and also predict them, right? If you can predict like the revenue coming in on an account or a territory, that's a holy grail, right? And so some of these algorithms out there do promise that. It is very difficult, right, to predict the future there. But some things I'm looking at is like once they have that account score using some supervised learning, which is kind of random forest or even like a neural network to look at what you've done in the past as far as like how a territory is performed, given a certain size, given certain attributes, and can we use those algorithms to predict like the results of a certain territory? And so you can run different sizes of territories, different groupings of accounts through these algorithms and see what kind of score output you're getting and back test that against all of your territories you built in the past. So generally, like I said, they're all supervised models. You can pick which one you want. They're all going to perform similarly. And especially within cells and software cells, they're really hard to predict. And that's why you don't see it happening a lot, but that's the direction that we're trying to go.
But it's not build me this territory. It's this is my idea for a territory. Where do you think we'll land with this? And then you're running different models to see
Yeah.
where it thinks based on historical territories and performance and stuff, where it thinks this territory will land. And then as you are experimenting not only with your account score, but also maybe, I mean, going back to the verticalization piece, and you're talking about what happens if I pull out a vertical and build territories through that. You can essentially, I mean, you run that through that and go, okay, does that actually maximize the dollar there, like the revenue? Or not?
Yeah.
Again, hard to predict, but
Yeah.
still.
Yeah. But rising model gives you like a better idea than not. And so that's what we are running. We've been doing a regression model for a number of years now. Is there something that's a little more sophisticated? Yeah, well, we're going to explore some of those other ones. Maybe a marginal difference, maybe not. We're going to dive in and figure it out.
Are you going to do that this year? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Are you like playing with that stuff, or are you like, are you just thinking about it?
We're going to test it out this year. We have a couple months here before we actually dive into territory planning,
Yeah.
get in
Yeah.
deep where we have some time to play around with it. And so we'll see if it bears any fruits.
What is it that, of all the things that we talked about and all the territory balancing stuff that's going on there, is that like the most exciting thing that like you wake up and you're just like, I can't wait to just
Yeah.
work on this? Or is there other
Yeah.
things like the account scoring or regression stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. This is most exciting. And then I'm also trying to adjacent to this. My role also covers like the capacity planning. It's what is the right size of a book, or tell me what is the right number of sales reps that we need for the year, and given different growth trajectories, like how do we want to scale that so that I can be really prescriptive about we need this many territories, we need this many sales reps to help set our cost plans for the year.
Future of territory planning right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
One other question. So this is related. How do you ensure the data quality is good enough? I think relating to really all of this stuff that we're doing, not just like balancing territories, but also you're running all the correlation and regression analysis. So how do you ensure the data quality is good enough, i.e. industry classifications being all over the place, often the case regardless of the data provider?
Yeah. That at some point you have to pick a data provider and roll with it and make the most out of it. You'll only be as good as what you can get. And so whether you're using like DMB, ZoomInfo, whoever it may be, those are kind of the big players, and using their data, and you just have to assume that it's mostly correct.
Yep. I would say that is the first place to start. And I know that it doesn't feel right because sometimes the data's not right, but you've got to plant your flag somewhere and go with it.
Yes.
Otherwise you'll spend forever cleaning data.
Yeah.
And go ahead. Sorry.
I would say, yeah, I know we have messy data in our system, but it's like, I can trust that probably 80% of it is accurate or mostly accurate. And we're going to move forward with that. If I try and spend the time to get the last 20% exactly right, it's going to take a lot of time and resources. You just have to try, yeah, like you said, plant your flag and move on to the next steps.
I think the last thing I'd say to that is also put controls in place for your most like precious data, whether that is like making sure it's filled out or using picklets so that you're getting the right accurate spellings of things. So you're not having to go clean that post like in a spreadsheet. So there's a lot of policy related stuff that you can do to just make sure that you're keeping it above that 80% mark and you're not down at like 45% or whatever that you just say. Uh,
Yeah, those are reports or controls to see when things get awry.
okay, this is the last question. I know we're a little bit over. How do you get sales leadership buy-in? And I think this is probably related to not just like the data stuff, but
Mhm.
maybe just in the overall scheme of things, because this is going to take time and resources to go and use a data scientist to go run correlation and regression analysis or maybe take it to the next level.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question, right? The things you don't want to lean on, or when you're explaining this to get executive buy-in, is we want to divvy up the workload among each member so that people aren't given too much work or too little work. We're going to make everyone more efficient, controlling our costs, maximizing the output of each sales rep, and then that way it affects the bottom line. So once you talk about in that term, it's way easy. And then the what often comes up, or the follow-up question, is like, how do I convince them that we need to do some sort of machine learning? The black box, maybe the sales leaders don't really understand all that goes into that. But if you start from like that qualitative standpoint and bring them along the journey and say, what are the fields you're interested in? What are the fields that are key to you all? And then you can bring in that correlation analysis and you're like, great, I just looked at this field that you like to use. It's spot on at the great metric. Here's another one you like to use. Maybe not as strong as some of these other fields, but then they're along in the journey and you're like, great, I'm going to take this and I'm going to throw it into a machine to do the output for us. And that way they're really familiar with actually what's going into it. They may not know exactly how it works, but then they'll trust you a lot more.
Amazing. Cool. I think we're definitely out of time. We're over by 2 minutes. And it was great in the sense of knowing that I'm going to be unemployed pretty soon because machines are going to build the territories for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else that you want to add that we haven't talked about today? I think we covered everything.
I think we covered everything. Yeah. Sometimes when you get into this and people who haven't done it before, it sounds really scary, really daunting because there's words and things you're not familiar with, but you could just start small. And once you start going, it's not that hard. Once you just do some simple things and you start small, you can do it.
Awesome. Colten, thanks so much for taking the time today. Thank you all for joining us. And until next time,
Cool.
see you.